I didn't plan on discovering it that night. No grand revelation, no dramatic confrontation. It wasn't even the kind of thing you'd expect in a movie. It was a slow, creeping feeling, like an itch that you couldn't scratch, or a shadow lurking just behind you that you weren't quite sure was there. I had always been the kind of person who ignored things until they were inescapable, call it avoidance or denial, but I wasn't one to go looking for trouble. I had been in a relationship with Kira for almost 6 years now, and it wasn't perfect, but it worked. Or at least, I convinced myself it did. She had this way of being present without really being there. Like, I'd be talking, and her eyes would wander. Or we'd be sharing a quiet evening, and suddenly she'd be on her phone, scrolling through social media, as though her mind was miles away. Small things at first, things I could dismiss with a laugh or a shrug, but they started to add up. I don't know why I didn't listen to my gut. Maybe I was afraid of what I might find, or maybe I was just too comfortable in my own little bubble. But something happened that night that broke the illusion. I had been working late again, staying up at the office longer than usual to get through a project. When I finally got home, the house was silent. I expected Kira to be on the couch, half watching TV, her phone always in hand. But she wasn't there. I checked the time, almost midnight. Strange. She wasn't someone who stayed out late. There was always something about her that made her prefer being at home, wrapped in comfort, wrapped in me. But tonight, that comfort was missing. It was like the house was empty, even though I knew she should be inside. I figured she must have gone out to grab something or was spending time with friends. But then I noticed the door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. I don't know why, but something about the crack in the door caught my attention. I had no intention of snooping, but the quietness of the house, coupled with my unease, pushed me to open it. I stepped inside. The first thing I saw was her phone. It was lying on the bed, face up, with a new message notification flashing on the screen. The message was from a name I didn't recognize, Jules. I hesitated. It was a fleeting moment, but I could feel the gravity of it. I knew, deep down, that something was off, and this was the moment I would either turn away or face whatever truth was waiting for me. I reached for the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. The message wasn't anything subtle. It was direct. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? I felt the air in my lungs leave me in one sharp breath. My hands went cold. I couldn't move for a second. Was this real? Was this really happening? I had always believed that if something like this were to happen, I'd know. The signs would be obvious. The clues would be there. But they weren't. Kira had always been so subtle, so careful. I never noticed anything until it was too late. Just as I stood there, frozen, the sound of the front door creaked open. My heart skipped. Kira was home. I quickly tossed the phone back on the bed and turned away. I pretended I hadn't seen anything, tried to convince myself that maybe I misread the message, that it didn't mean what I thought it meant. But my mind wouldn't let it go. She walked in moments later, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey, you're home late," she said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just finished up some things at work," I replied, trying to sound casual. My voice felt tight. The tension between us was palpable, like a thick fog. She didn't seem to notice. We talked for a few minutes, mostly small talk, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept racing back to the phone, to that message. Who was Jules? What did they mean by last night? And why had she left her phone out like that? I had always trusted Kira. I had always believed that she was loyal, that we had a connection that couldn't be broken. But now, with each passing second, that trust seemed like it was crumbling in front of me. And the worst part was, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew what was happening, that she was fully aware of the cracks in our relationship, and perhaps, she was just waiting for them to break. Kira moved closer to me, resting her hand on my shoulder as she kissed my cheek. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. For a moment, I thought about telling her the truth, asking her about Jules, about everything. But something stopped me. I wasn't ready to hear her lie to my face. And I wasn't ready to hear the truth either. I pulled away slightly, offering a strained smile. "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied. But I knew in that moment that things would never be the same again. The tension that hung between Kira and me that night was almost unbearable. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I could feel the weight of the truth pressing on my chest, suffocating me. We sat on the couch, watching some mindless TV show she liked, but I couldn't focus on the screen. My eyes kept flicking to her, to the way she held herself. It was like she was right there, but at the same time, she was miles away. I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to know. I needed to ask her about Jules, about the message, about everything. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear of what I might hear. Or maybe it was that little shred of hope deep down inside me that told me I was just imagining things, that there was some innocent explanation for everything. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't ignore it. I stood up suddenly, making Kira glance at me, startled. "Hey, where are you going?" she asked, her voice light. But I could hear the underlying tension in it. She knew something was wrong, even if she didn't know exactly what it was. "I need to think," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. I turned away before she could say anything else. I needed space to clear my head, but more than that, I needed to figure out what the hell was happening. I walked into the kitchen and stood by the counter, staring at the sink, but not really seeing it. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a sound that used to feel comforting, but now it felt cold. Minutes passed, maybe more. I could hear Kira moving around in the living room, maybe checking her phone again. Maybe she was texting Jules, or maybe she was pretending nothing was wrong, the same way I had been. I couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and walked out of the apartment. I needed air, something to break the suffocating stillness of our home. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going, but I just kept walking, letting the city's noise drown out the chaos in my head. I passed by the usual spots, the corner store, the park bench we used to sit on together. Everything felt foreign now. It was like the world had changed, but I hadn't noticed until now. I kept thinking about that message. I couldn't stop myself. What was going on between her and Jules? After what felt like hours of aimless wandering, I ended up at a bar. I didn't even want to drink, but I ordered a beer anyway. The bartender didn't ask any questions. I sat there, staring at my drink, watching the bubbles rise to the surface. The same way my thoughts were rising, consuming me. I couldn't do this anymore. I had to confront her. I had to know the truth. So I called her. The phone rang twice before she picked up, and I could tell by the way she answered that she knew. Her voice was too soft, too controlled. "Daniel?" she said, sounding surprised but not shocked. "Kira, where are you?" I asked, my voice more desperate than I intended. "I'm at home. Where else would I be?" she responded, but there was a hint of defensiveness in her tone. She was lying. I could feel it. "I need to talk to you," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "We need to talk. About everything." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Okay," she finally said, her voice tight. "Come home. We'll talk." I hung up the phone, not even waiting for her to say anything else. I didn't care about pleasantries anymore. I didn't care about the facade we had been keeping up for the past few months. I just needed answers. I walked back home, my thoughts swirling. Every step felt heavier than the last. I wasn't sure what would happen when I walked through that door. Would she deny everything? Would she admit the truth? Or worse, would she try to twist it, make it seem like I was the one who was wrong? When I got back, the apartment was dark, except for the dim glow of the lamp in the corner. Kira was sitting on the couch, waiting. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't even try to pretend like she was happy to see me. I took a deep breath, standing there for a moment before speaking. "You've been seeing someone else, haven't you?" I asked, the words finally coming out. It felt like a relief to say them, even though I already knew the answer. She didn't look at me right away. She stared at the floor, her hands tightly gripping the edges of the cushion. I waited for her to say something, anything, but all she did was nod. "I didn't want to hurt you, Daniel," she said quietly, her voice breaking a little. "But I've been feeling this emptiness for a while now. I don't know how to explain it." "Don't you dare," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "Don't try to explain it. You've been seeing someone else. You've been lying to me. I deserve more than that." Her eyes finally met mine, and I could see the guilt there, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fix what had already been broken. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted this. But it just happened, and I couldn't stop it." I felt a coldness wash over me as I processed her words. She didn't even sound sorry. She sounded resigned, like she had already made peace with it. I took a step back, unable to look at her anymore. The person I had known, the person I had loved for so long, was gone. And in her place was someone who had betrayed me, someone who had taken everything for granted. "I don't want this anymore," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I had never felt more sure of anything in my life. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring at Kira. Her words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I could feel my chest tightening with every second that passed. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't place: regret, guilt, fear. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what had already been broken. She could apologize, she could say all the right things, but the truth had already settled deep inside me. The truth was that she had crossed a line I never thought she would. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice trembling. But I couldn't bring myself to care about her apology. Not anymore. I didn't want to hurt you, Daniel. I never meant for it to go this far. I could feel a knot in my stomach tighten. It wasn't the apology that hurt. It was the realization that this had been going on for much longer than I had ever imagined. That something had been shifting between us for months, and I had been too blind to see it. "You're sorry?" I finally said, my voice coming out colder than I intended. "You're sorry for what? For lying to me? For betraying me? For turning into someone I don't even recognize?" Kira flinched, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. What could she say to justify this? There were no words that could make this right. There were no excuses she could give that would erase the hurt. "I don't know how this happened," she said quietly, almost as though she was speaking to herself. "I don't know when everything started to go wrong, but it did. I just couldn't stop it, Daniel. I couldn't take it anymore." Her excuses, her attempts to explain, it wasn't enough. I felt like I was suffocating. I had been holding my breath for months, waiting for something, anything, to change. But now that I had the truth, I realized there was nothing left. No love, no trust, no chance to go back to what we once had. "Why him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does he have that I don't?" She hesitated for a moment before answering, and when she spoke, her voice cracked. "It wasn't about him, Daniel. It was never about him. It's just that I stopped feeling like myself. I stopped feeling connected to you, and I didn't know how to fix it. So I found someone else. Someone who made me feel like I was alive again." There it was. The unspoken truth. She didn't just cheat on me. She cheated on herself, too. She was searching for something in someone else that she couldn't find in herself. And now, I was the one left holding the pieces of everything that had shattered between us. "Do you love him?" I asked, unable to stop myself. Kira looked at me, her eyes softening as if she was torn between the truth and the lie. She opened her mouth, but no words came out for a long while. The silence between us was deafening. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what love is anymore. I don't know what's real. But I do know that this," she gestured between the two of us, "this hasn't been real for a long time." Her words stung, cutting deeper than anything I had expected. The rawness in her voice, the way she seemed so resigned, so indifferent, it made everything feel like it was slipping away from me. She wasn't just apologizing for the affair. She was apologizing for the person she had become. The person who had drifted so far from me that she didn't even recognize herself. I stood there, frozen, trying to process it all. But nothing made sense. All the years we had spent together, all the promises, all the moments we shared, they felt like a distant memory now, a fading dream. I thought I knew her. I thought I understood her. But this was a stranger standing in front of me. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until finally, I spoke again. "I can't do this anymore, Kira. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when it's not. You've made your choice, and now I have to make mine." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the need to comfort her. I wasn't the one who had broken us. I wasn't the one who had torn apart what we had built. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking as the tears fell. I shook my head, my heart hardening. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Kira. Sorry doesn't take back the lies, the betrayal, the way you made me feel like I was nothing. Sorry doesn't bring back the trust, and it doesn't bring back the love." She opened her mouth, as if to say something else, but I stopped her with a raised hand. "Please, don't. I need to go." I turned and walked out of the room, not waiting for her to say anything more. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. Not in that apartment that had once felt like home, but now felt like a prison. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and stepped out into the night. The cool air hit my face, but it didn't bring me relief. It didn't bring me anything. I was empty. I was numb. And yet, I knew I couldn't go back. I had spent so much time trying to make things work, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. And now I was free. Free of the lies, free of the heartache. But the freedom didn't feel as liberating as I thought it would. The streets seemed empty, the world around me muted. I didn't know where I was headed, but I couldn't stay in that apartment with her anymore. The love I thought we had was gone, and with it, a part of me. I needed answers. I needed closure. But more than anything, I needed to move on. The walk through the city streets felt endless. Each step I took seemed to carry me further away from what used to be my life. But at the same time, it felt like I was walking straight into the unknown. The noise of the traffic, the flashing lights, the voices of strangers, all of it felt like I was surrounded by a million things that didn't matter anymore. It was as though I was walking through a world that I no longer belonged to, and it left me with an unsettling sense of isolation. I didn't know where I was going. My feet just moved automatically, like they were guided by something deeper than logic or intention. I tried to think, tried to make sense of the conversation, of what Kira had said, but it all felt like an overwhelming blur. The betrayal, the lies, the hollow apology. There was no way to fix this, no way to go back. I ended up at the park, the one Kira and I used to visit when we first met. It was quiet now, the park lights casting long shadows over the empty benches. I found a bench near the small pond, sat down, and let the cool night air wash over me. The stillness was almost suffocating, and yet it was the only thing that felt familiar anymore. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. The message from Jules was still there, mocking me, haunting me. I wanted to ignore it, but my fingers moved before my mind could stop them. I opened the message thread, scrolling through the brief conversation that had started everything. Jules had sent that message just before Kira had walked in tonight. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? My stomach turned. Kira had been with him. Last night. The night before I had seen her, pretending everything was fine. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she spent in his arms, lying to my face, telling me that everything was okay? And what was worse, I hadn't seen it coming. I had trusted her completely, had believed every word she said, every gesture she made. I slammed my fist against the bench, the sound echoing in the empty park, but the pain in my knuckles didn't match the rage boiling inside me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I stared at my phone, my mind racing. I thought of calling Jules, confronting him, telling him how he had ruined everything. But what good would that do? Kira was the one who had made the choice. Kira was the one who had betrayed me. Jules was just a symptom of a much deeper problem. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees around me, and for a moment, I thought I heard a voice. But when I looked around, there was no one there. Just the darkness of the park, the stillness that had taken over my life. The silence was deafening. I stayed there for what felt like hours, lost in my thoughts, my mind going over every little detail, trying to piece everything together. When I finally stood up to leave, I realized that I hadn't even thought about where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back to that apartment. Not yet. I needed more time, more distance. I wandered the streets aimlessly, finding myself in unfamiliar neighborhoods, just trying to escape from the reality that had been thrust upon me. I wasn't ready to face Kira again, not with everything I was feeling. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. After a while, I ended up at a bar, one I used to go to with friends when I needed to get away from the stress of life. I hadn't been there in months, but tonight it felt like the only place where I could find some semblance of peace, even if it was only for a little while. I sat at the bar and ordered a drink, my thoughts swirling, but at least here, I didn't have to think about Kira. The bartender, a guy I vaguely recognized, slid the drink in front of me with a nod. I didn't ask for his opinion, didn't feel like talking. I just needed something to numb the ache, even if only for a short time. I sipped the drink slowly, staring at the glass, watching the ice melt as the liquor swirled inside. But no matter how much I drank, it didn't change the fact that my whole life had just been shattered. The person I thought I knew, the woman I had shared so many moments with, had turned into a stranger. And no amount of alcohol could erase the feeling that I had lost something that could never be replaced. After a while, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see a familiar face, my old friend, Alex. He had been one of the people I hadn't seen in a while, someone I used to hang out with during the good times. He seemed surprised to see me sitting alone at the bar, especially in this state. "Daniel," he asked, his voice full of concern. What are you doing here? I just shook my head. I didn't have the energy to explain. Long day, I said quietly. Alex studied me for a moment before sitting down next to me. You don't look all right, he said. What's going on? I should have told him. I should have let it all out. Told him about Kira, about the betrayal, about everything that had happened. But I didn't. I just sat there, lost in my own thoughts, staring into the amber liquid in my glass. You know, you can talk to me, man, Alex said, his tone softer now. Whatever it is, I'm here. For a moment, I thought about telling him everything. But instead, I just nodded, muttering, Not tonight, Alex. Not tonight. He didn't push me. He knew better than that. Instead, he clapped me on the back and ordered another round of drinks. We sat in silence for a while, each of us wrapped up in our own thoughts, but at least for that moment, I didn't feel completely alone. As the night wore on, the numbness started to take over again. I was starting to feel the pull of exhaustion, the weight of everything that had happened, but I didn't want to go home. Not yet. Not while I still had questions that Kira would never be able to answer, no matter how hard she tried. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I didn't need her answers. I needed to find my own way out of this mess. I needed to find who I was again, away from the shadow of the person I thought I knew. I woke up the next morning to the persistent ringing of my phone, a sound I hadn't wanted to hear. I had managed to find a temporary escape last night, some semblance of peace in the noise of the bar, the dull hum of conversation, the whiskey dulling the edges of everything. But now, I was awake again, and reality had come crashing back, sharper than ever. I rolled over, grabbing my phone off the nightstand, half expecting to see dozens of missed calls from Kira. But there were only a few, all from the same number, hers. She had left me voicemails, each one more frantic than the last, each one trying to explain, trying to make me understand. I couldn't bring myself to listen to them. I already knew what she was going to say. I let the phone drop onto the bed, the weight of it pressing on my chest. I didn't want to deal with her today. I didn't want to hear her beg for forgiveness or promise that it would never happen again. What could she possibly say that would change anything? I got out of bed and went to the kitchen, needing to do something, anything to distract myself. The apartment was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that settled deep in your bones and made every moment feel heavier. The smell of last night's dinner still lingered in the air, a reminder of the life that had once felt stable, comforting. I made myself a cup of coffee, but I didn't drink it. It sat on the counter, cold and untouched, as my mind replayed the events of the past 24 hours. I couldn't stop thinking about Kira, about her betrayal, but more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about myself. Who had I become? How had I allowed myself to be so blind, so trusting? The question gnawed at me. The truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had spent so much of my life tied to Kira, wrapped in the comfort of what we had built, that I had lost sight of who I was outside of her. I had given so much of myself to this relationship, to this woman who had now shattered everything. I stared at my reflection in the window, trying to find something familiar in the face staring back at me. But it felt foreign. The tired eyes, the dark circles, the face that had once been full of hope and possibility, now drained of any joy. I needed to leave, to get away from all of it, at least for a little while. I needed to breathe. I needed to figure out who I was, what I wanted, without Kira. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. The city was waking up, people rushing to start their days, but I felt like I was floating in a different world. The world I had known was gone, and now I was just a ghost, walking through the motions. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from the apartment. I couldn't face her right now. Not yet. I needed to be alone. I needed to clear my head, to understand why I had let things go on for so long without noticing the cracks. How had I missed all the signs? I ended up at a small park near the outskirts of the city. It was quieter here, less crowded, and the trees seemed to wrap around the benches, offering some sense of solitude. I sat down on one of the benches, letting the stillness wash over me, but it didn't help. It didn't make the pain go away. The thoughts swirled in my head, each one more chaotic than the last. I wanted to scream, to yell at Kira, to demand answers, but that wouldn't change anything. I already knew the truth. She had chosen him. She had chosen someone else over me, over what we had. A deep breath. Another. I was doing my best to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check. But they were all rushing to the surface now, overwhelming me. I had to make a decision. I had to decide what I was going to do next. The decision wasn't easy. It never is. I could go back to her, listen to her plead for forgiveness, hear her promises that she would change. But deep down, I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. Trust was something that had taken years to build, and she had torn it down in a matter of months. I could never look at her the same way again. But walking away, that was hard too. The thought of leaving everything we had behind was terrifying. It was like stepping into the unknown, like losing a part of myself I wasn't sure I could live without. The idea of being alone, truly alone, after so many years of being with her, it felt like a loss I couldn't even comprehend. I glanced down at my phone again, feeling that familiar pull. Kira had called again, leaving another voicemail. I pressed the button to listen, not knowing what I expected. "Daniel, please, just pick up the phone. I need to talk to you. I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've hurt you, but you have to understand. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to lose you. Please, please come home. I'll explain everything." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. But they didn't make me feel better. They didn't heal the wound that had been opened. They didn't undo the damage she had done. I took a deep breath, the cold air biting at my skin. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to face the truth, to face the reality of what had happened. And as much as I hated it, as much as it broke me to my core, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't go back. Not to her, not to the life we had. I had to move on. I had to find a new path. I had to figure out who I was without her. I hit the button to end the voicemail, turned off my phone, and left the park. For the first time in days, I felt like I was making a decision that was mine. It wasn't easy, and I knew the road ahead would be long, but it was the only way forward. I was done living in the shadow of a lie. It was time for me to step into the light, no matter how hard it might be. It felt like time had stopped when I made that decision. Walking away from Kira, from the life we had built, was harder than I ever imagined. The weight of it pressed on me, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't freedom. Not yet. But it was a choice. And sometimes, a choice was all you needed to start the healing process. The problem was, I didn't know how to heal. I didn't know how to fix what had been broken. I didn't know where to even begin. I walked for what felt like hours, the streets blending together into one continuous blur. Every corner I turned, every face I passed, I felt like I was surrounded by people who had no idea what I was going through. I was a man in limbo, caught between the past I had known and the uncertain future that awaited me. I finally ended up at the river. It was quiet here, the sound of the water rushing over rocks providing a calming backdrop to the chaotic mess in my head. I sat down on one of the stone benches, my mind racing. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Kira. I didn't even need to look to know who it was. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to pick up anymore. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I stared out at the water, the dim glow of the city lights reflecting off its surface. There was something beautiful about the stillness of it all. I needed stillness. I needed clarity. But it was hard to find any clarity when my thoughts were consumed by everything that had transpired. I had thought we were happy. I had believed that Kira and I had something real, something unbreakable. We had been together for so long. I had shared parts of myself with her that I had never shared with anyone else. But all of it, every single moment we had spent together, was now tainted by the truth I had uncovered. She had betrayed me. She had given herself to someone else, and she had done it in such a way that I had no idea it was happening. It was as if I had been living in a dream, and the moment I woke up, everything was shattered. The ache in my chest was unbearable, but there was something else, too. A kind of anger that I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. I was angry at Kira for what she had done. Angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. Angry at the world for making me feel like I had lost something so precious. The buzzing of my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. This time, it was a text message from Kira. "Please, Daniel. Let me explain. I'm so sorry." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the screen. I had already made my decision, but the temptation to respond was strong. Part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, wanted to understand why she had done it. But another part of me knew that the explanation didn't matter. Nothing she said could undo the damage. I turned off my phone, stuffing it into my pocket. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I cared too much. I needed to distance myself from her, from everything that reminded me of what we had lost. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting for so long. The wind was colder now, and the night felt heavier. I needed to keep moving. I needed to find a way to fill the emptiness that was spreading inside me. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter. The act of moving forward, however aimlessly, was the only thing I could control. I ended up at a small diner, one I had passed by countless times but never thought to step into. It was a late hour, and the place was almost empty. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, chatting softly, their voices blending with the clink of silverware and the hum of the coffee machine. I slid into a booth by the window, my mind still reeling, and waited for the waitress. She was an older woman, her face lined with years of stories, and she smiled as she approached. "What can I get you, Han?" she asked in a tone that was warm, but distant, like she'd seen everything and wasn't fazed by anything anymore. I ordered a coffee, black, and she disappeared behind the counter. I sat there, staring out the window at the street, watching the occasional car pass by. For the first time in days, I felt a little lighter. The act of being alone in this strange, quiet place brought some semblance of peace. There were no questions here, no past, no Kira, just the present moment. But even then, the weight of everything still lingered in the back of my mind. I kept thinking about her, about the moments we had shared. How had we gotten here? How had we come to this point of no return? I took a long sip of my coffee, trying to steady my thoughts. The warmth of it spread through me, but it didn't take away the ache. I was so tired of hurting. I was tired of carrying the weight of this relationship, of this betrayal. But what could I do? I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't change the past. All I could do was keep moving forward, even if it was one painful step at a time. The waitress returned with my coffee refill and gave me a small, understanding smile. "You all right, Han?" she asked gently, her eyes kind but knowing. I smiled faintly, trying to mask the turmoil that was still boiling beneath the surface. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing either of us. "I'm all right." She nodded and moved away, and for a moment, I sat in the quiet, letting the stillness settle around me. I wasn't sure what I was looking for in that moment, but I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth. The truth was, I had to let go. I had to let go of Kira. I had to let go of the past, no matter how much it hurt. It was time for me to move on. And maybe, just maybe, in doing so, I could find a piece of myself that had been lost along the way. It had been days since I last spoke to Kira, and with every hour that passed, I felt myself being pulled further away from her. The pain, the betrayal, the lies, it was all like a storm that had swept through my life, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. But in some strange way, I could feel the edges of that storm begin to settle. I wasn't healed, not by any means, but I could sense the shift. The rawness of my emotions had started to fade, and with it came a clarity I hadn't had before. I didn't want to be in the same apartment anymore. I didn't want to be surrounded by the remnants of what had been. I didn't want to smell her perfume on the pillow or hear her laughter echoing through the empty rooms. It was all too much, too real, too painful. So I packed a bag. It was a small, simple gesture, but it felt like I was making a move that I couldn't take back. I was stepping away from the life I had built with her, and I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep living in a place that reminded me of everything I had lost. The streets felt different as I stepped outside. The city seemed larger, colder. I had always thought I understood the rhythms of this place, but now, it felt like I was walking through a foreign world. The people passing by, each absorbed in their own lives, didn't know what had happened to me. They didn't know the weight I was carrying, and that was somehow comforting. No one knew my pain. No one knew how far I had fallen. I made my way to a small hotel on the outskirts of the city, away from the familiar places that haunted me. It wasn't much, a small, dimly lit lobby with old carpet and faded paintings on the walls. But it was exactly what I needed. I didn't want luxury. I didn't want anything that could remind me of her, of the life I had lost. I just wanted something neutral, something where I could think. As I checked in, the receptionist gave me a polite smile, her eyes glancing briefly at the large duffel bag slung over my shoulder, but she didn't ask any questions. She didn't need to. I didn't want anyone's sympathy. I didn't want anyone to know that I had been living in a lie for so long. The room was small, just a bed, a nightstand, and a window that looked out over the street. The air was stale, but it didn't matter. It was mine for the night. I threw my bag onto the bed and sat down at the small desk, staring at the phone in my hand. For the first time in days, I let myself look at her messages again. There were dozens. Dozens of apologies, of pleas for me to talk to her, to come home. But I didn't want to hear any of it. I didn't want her words. I didn't want her voice. I didn't need any more empty promises or fake regret. I set the phone down and rubbed my eyes, exhaustion creeping over me. But sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice. I saw the way she looked at me when she admitted the truth. And I couldn't forget the way she said she didn't know what love was anymore. That was the thing that stung the most. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't the lies. It was that, in the end, she had stopped loving me. I stood up abruptly, pacing around the room. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there, trapped in my own thoughts, letting the anger and sadness build up inside me. So, I walked out of the room and into the hotel lobby. The streets outside were darker now, the city illuminated by streetlights that cast long shadows across the pavement. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I just needed to walk. I passed a small bar, the sound of laughter and conversation spilling out into the night. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the doorframe. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew that I didn't want to be alone right now. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of beer and cigarettes. A jukebox played softly in the background, and a few people were scattered around the bar, deep in their own worlds. I found an empty stool at the counter and sat down, ordering a drink. The bartender nodded without saying anything, his face impassive. I wasn't here for conversation. I was just here for the noise, for the distraction. As I sipped my drink, I tried not to think about Kira. But the thoughts came anyway. Every time I tried to push them away, they came back stronger. Her voice, her touch, the way she used to laugh at my jokes, the way she would run her fingers through my hair before we went to sleep. All of it felt so real, but it was slipping away, piece by piece, like sand through my fingers. I looked around the bar, watching people laugh and talk, and I felt so detached from it all. How did they do it? How did they go on, living their lives without the weight of a broken heart hanging over them? Rough night, a voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a man sitting next to me, his eyes bloodshot from too many drinks. I didn't answer right away, just stared at the amber liquid in my glass. "Don't worry," he said with a smirk. "It gets better. Eventually." I glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. "Does it?" I asked, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. The man shrugged, leaning back in his seat. "Doesn't matter if it does or not. Time keeps moving. You can either move with it, or let it crush you." I looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess you're right." He didn't say anything else, just turned back to his drink, and I followed suit. The quiet, the hum of the bar, it felt comforting in its own way. It didn't change anything, but for a brief moment, it allowed me to step outside of myself, outside of the pain. When I finished my drink, I stood up, paid the bartender, and walked out into the night. The air had grown colder, but I didn't care. My mind was still racing, still tangled in thoughts of Kira. But I had made a decision. I had made the choice to walk away. And that, for now, was enough. It had been a few weeks since I left the hotel. A few weeks since the weight of Kira's betrayal had settled into something more manageable, something I could look at without feeling like I was drowning. I wasn't exactly whole again, but I was rebuilding. And sometimes, rebuilding meant taking a step back, letting go of what weighed you down, and allowing yourself the chance to heal. I found a small apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, just a modest space with white walls and wooden floors that creaked underfoot, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the constant ache of Kira's absence. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal every time I woke up or went to bed. I threw myself into work, diving deep into projects that had once seemed secondary. But the real change came when I started doing things for myself, things that had always been on the back burner. I went to the gym, even when I didn't feel like it. I began reading again. The way I used to before my life became consumed by the routines I had with Kira. I took long walks, exploring the city like I was a tourist. I visited parks I had never been to, found new cafes, and met people along the way. It wasn't about replacing what I had lost. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship, outside of the pain. Slowly, I was learning to be content on my own. One evening, I was walking through a park when I spotted a familiar face. It was Alex, the old friend who had been there for me in those first, brutal days after I walked away from Kira. He waved me down, his expression warm and genuine. "Hey man, long time no see," Alex said as I approached, his voice full of that familiar, easygoing energy. I smiled back, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in months. "Yeah, it's been a while." "Everything okay?" he asked, his gaze softening as he noticed the subtle change in me. "Better than ever, actually," I said, surprising myself with the truth in those words. I hadn't been able to say that for a long time, but it felt good to say it now. "You were right," I added. "It gets better. It just takes time." Alex clapped me on the back. "I knew you'd get there eventually. You've always been stronger than you thought." We chatted for a while, catching up on life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Kira. I wasn't consumed by the past. I was just living, and it felt good. As the conversation drifted into laughter, I realized that my life wasn't defined by the woman who had left me behind. I wasn't defined by the mistakes I had made or the heartache I had endured. I was defined by the strength it took to stand up again. And that, more than anything, was something no one could take from me. Days turned into weeks, and I kept moving forward. I still had moments of loneliness, of doubt. But each time those moments came, I embraced them instead of running from them. I realized that being alone didn't mean being lost. It meant I had the freedom to choose my next steps. Eventually, I met someone new. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or anything dramatic, but it was different. It was simple, real. She didn't make me forget Kira, but she showed me that there was room for something new in my life, something I didn't have to rush or force. And when I looked back on everything that had happened, I understood something. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, and sometimes you end up in places you never expected. But that doesn't mean you can't find happiness again. It doesn't mean you can't rebuild stronger than before. The sun set one evening, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, and as I watched the horizon, I realized I was no longer the person I had been. I wasn't the broken man who had walked away from the wreckage of his past. I was someone new, someone better, and that was all I needed.